Hello readers, it is the last week in October, so I figured what better time to film my September wrap up. In September, I read 4 books, one of them being Perfect is Boring by Tyra Banks and her mama. The tagline for the book is actually 10 things my mama taught me about beauty, booty, and being a boss. I picked up this book because Amy Landino over at Amy TV was doing like a community book reading of it. I listened to it via audiobook, which I borrowed from my library, but being that I'm not too familiar with Tyra Banks and Tyra Banks's shows and her personality, I could be a little off here, but the entire book was narrated by her and her mom, and they kind of went back and forth, and some of it felt a little bit overacting or overdone. They were very quippy back and forth with each other. The modeling and the fashion world is not something that I give too much thought about, so hearing her talk about it and all the complexities of modeling and fashion was fascinating, honestly, because I just have never really thought about it. She specifically tells a story where she went to Paris by herself, I think at the age of 17, and she talks about what she did in preparation for that trip and to get that job, and she did so much research. I was really intrigued at being shown all these little details that I never really stopped to think about. She also talks about the meltdown that she had on Top Model, where she was like yelling at Tiffany, and I had seen that clip prior to her talking about it, where she's just like,
I was rooting for you! We were all rooting for you! How dare you!
It was really touching to see how supportive her mother was through everything. So it's a little bit of a memoir, a little bit of a self-help book. I enjoyed it and gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. The second book I read was The Common Good by Robert B. Reich. I feel like the foundation for this book were the 2 opposing philosophies of liberals and conservatives. And it seems like liberal people tend to believe that we are inherently good, whereas conservatives often believe that we are inherently evil. So the book goes into kind of earlier in the United States when the American dream and everything else was founded in that idea of the common good, that we were all working together to make things good for everyone. Over time, that has changed. The author goes on to talk about how those that don't believe in the common good are willing to break the rules and circumvent them. That they do it for selfish reasons, but also because they feel like other people in their position would do the same thing. So they don't believe in the common good. They don't believe that people will uphold the same standards. They believe that people are selfish and they're going to break the rules, so that's what they end up doing. I did read this a few weeks ago, so I feel like I'm not doing this justice at all. The book does not necessarily present any solutions, but it does mention that we have to start fighting for the common good again if we want to maintain and hold on to our morals and values as a country. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I did listen to it as an audiobook, and it's pretty short, so it's really interesting when you consider what's happening in the US today and these 2 very strong opposing ideals that are happening right now. I think it might help provide some understanding for what's happening with the GOP right now, but I don't know if that necessarily will provide any kind of peace of mind. I mean, if anything, it might make you feel a little angrier, but what I really appreciated about the book, it's that it gave me a lot of things to think about. The third book I read was Lord of the Flies by William Golding, and my son is currently in AP Lit, and he's not much of a reader. So in an effort to encourage him and be supportive, I told him that whatever books he had to read, that I would read them with him. And I was kind of excited about this until I realized he was going to be reading classical books. I'm just not a fan of classical books, mostly because I don't understand what I'm reading, and it kind of hurts my brain to try to process the information, and I just don't feel like reading should be that much of a chore. When I was in high school, I didn't read like anything that was assigned, and that really impacted my enthusiasm for reading, which is unfortunate. So Lord of the Flies is a young adult classic where a bunch of boys get stranded on an island and they kind of struggle to maintain a sense of civility amongst themselves. They're trying to wait it out in hopes that they'll get rescued. I wouldn't say that the writing was too difficult to understand, and I know this was written a long time ago, but it really just annoyed me because it reminded me of how shitty and douchey boys can be to each other. For example, there is a character who says, "You can call me whatever you want, just don't call me Piggy." And guess what? Guess what everyone started calling him? The whole book. Like literally. That's the one thing. He just said, just don't call me that. Just don't call me that. It hurts my feelings. Don't call me that. And so like, There were quite a few sad parts, and you know, it was emotional. I hated how Piggy in particular was treated throughout the entire book. I think I connected with him because he was like their moral compass. I think Piggy wanted to do things the right way. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He didn't want to be mean. He wanted to kind of help maintain that civility. And he also had asthma, which I can totally relate to because I have asthma. So I read it with my son. I think I enjoyed the time that I spent with him and the discussions that we had while we were reading it together, probably more so than the book, but I don't regret reading the book. I'm glad I know that story finally, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And the last book I read in September was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This book is told in verse, and the main character is Xiomara, who lives in New York, and she is Afro-Latinx, and she discovers poetry, slam poetry, as a way to kind of deal with the things happening in her life, to deal with her anger, to deal with her family, to deal with discovering herself and her religion and her emotions. I got this book in a page habit box, so it actually has annotations from the author, which is pretty awesome. But I did also listen to the audiobook, which I got from my library, and it was read by the author Elizabeth Acevedo, and I would strongly, strongly recommend that you listen to the audiobook because that experience was very emotional. To hear her reading her words and reciting her poetry exactly the way she intended, with the emotion that she intended, was just very, very powerful. I gave this 5 out of 5 freaking amazing stars. I did do a standalone review for this, which I did as spoken word poetry, and I will link to that in the description below. We're probably way past books that you've read in September, but I would still like to know, how many did you read? What did you get through? What were you most excited about? If you like seeing my face and watching words come out of my mouth, be sure to subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.